Welcome to all of you. My name is Chantal Kestelot. I'm working at the CEGES SOMA, which is the Center on the History of War and Contemporary Society, where I dealt with public history, and my institution was associated with the organization of this session. I'm very happy to coordinate one of the two first panel of this conference. I will first give the floor to Alana Bailey. Alana has studied history at the University of Pretoria. She's now the head of cultural affairs of AfriForum, which is an independent organization that deals with minority rights. And I think her contribution is very interesting because there is a clear link with what Anna Ridney said in the previous session. We have here a link to very contemporary phenomenon, even if she will show us that controversial about monument is not completely new in the South African context, and that goes back even to the beginning of the 20th century. Alana Bailey, you have the floor.
Thank you so much, and good morning to everybody. Thank you for the opportunity to participate in this extremely relevant conference and discussion. And thank you for your patience with me. As I said, I'm not that experienced in Zoom conferencing. One of my colleagues at work often laments with reference to monuments, "Oh, does our past have a future?" And as a historian, I would like to think yes, but in general, heritage conservation is the stepchild of all budgets. While the complex nature of the past and interpersonal and national relationships complicate the issue even more. Just as a brief introduction to the South African scene, our country has a population of about 59.6 million people. The population comprises more than 11 major identity groups, all of whom are numerical minorities. The groups have distinctive cultures and languages, sometimes core areas of residence and concentration, and often histories of struggles against domination by other groups. Compared to other identities available to citizens, the South African identity itself has often been a thin, fluid, and contested national identity, exploited for purposes of political mobilization. Similarly, heritage resources such as monuments have been constructed, relocated, and even destructed through the years to further political aims. An early example of the destruction of a monument dates back to the Anglo-Boer War of 1899-1902. In 1893, a language monument was unveiled in a town called Burgersdorp to celebrate the use of Dutch in the Cape Colonial Parliament. During the Anglo-Boer War between Britain and the Boer republics, this monument was badly vandalized. After the war, it was removed completely by the British authorities, but the residents of the town demanded that they wanted to have their monument back. A replica was unveiled in 1907, as the original could not be found. But in 1939, the original was indeed discovered. It was buried almost 300 kilometers away. It was eventually re-erected in its damaged condition next to a replica as a powerful reminder of the violent nature of cultural and political clashes and the impact it has on monuments. You can see it there in the center. In the 20th century, racial tensions came to overshadow the clash between Boer and Brit, culminating after 1948 in the anti-apartheid struggle. In 1994, the first democratic elections took place in South Africa, and the African National Congress, or better known as the ANC, came into power, which is still the ruling party in the country. After the political transition, tangible and intangible heritage resources and elements such as statues, monuments, and place names were examined to ensure that offensive names were changed and busts and portraits of pre-1994 political leaders were removed from most public buildings. Some of these objects were stored in archives, museums, and storage rooms. Some disappeared, and others were transferred to places and communities which were willing to accept them, such as these statues on a hill near the town called Urania. A process also started to commemorate anti-colonial and anti-apartheid struggle heroes, which included the Long March to Freedom National Heritage Monument. This monument has been relocated several times. It comprises life-sized bronze statues of, and I quote, heroes who fought in the South African struggle for democracy over the past 4 centuries. At present, there are about 100 of these statues, but eventually there is supposed to be 400, all moving symbolically towards a destination of democracy. In South Africa, monuments are often targeted by vandals for economic reasons. Efforts are, for example, made to break off sections of it in order to sell it as scrap metal to dealers. And here you can see a very recent example in that regard. 3 people who vandalized a First World War memorial in Kimberley in January of this year. Isolated cases of politically inspired vandalism were also recorded after 1994. In 2012, a state-organized national solidarity conference took place to discuss ways to improve national solidarity and social cohesion. This event didn't pay much attention to statues per se, but rather focused on ways in which culture in general could be used to bridge a growing abyss between government and its citizens. This state of affairs changed dramatically in 2015. The year before, allegations of corruption in which the then state president, Mr. Jacob Zuma, was involved, became rife. At the beginning of 2015, President Zuma declared that all problems in present-day South Africa could be traced back to the arrival of European settlers. It seemed to be an effort to deflect attention from these accusations by creating scapegoats. Barely a month later, on the 9th of March 2015, a protest movement came to life in Cape Town. Originally, it was directed against the statue at the University of Cape Town that commemorated Cecil John Rhodes, a British mining magnate and politician in Southern Africa. His legacy contributed significantly to the university, so his statue was erected there. But this protest movement, inspired by the philosophy of Frantz Fanon, with his focus on decolonization and white privilege, became known as the Rhodes Must Fall movement. The movement demanded the removal of Rhodes' statue from the campus, and they described it as a symbol of white supremacy and oppression. The protesters made use of tactics including occupation, throwing human feces at the statue, and eventually even violence to get their message across. The aims of the movement continued to expand later, also including demands for access to tertiary education and accommodation, for no-fee education in South Africa, and the decolonization of education across South Africa. Later, artworks from the university's collection were even burnt in public. The great amount of media and social media attention that the calls for the removal of the statue generated, as well as the fact that the management of the university gave into the demands and first shrouded, as you could have seen in the previous slide, and then within a month removed the statue in a blatant contravention of existing heritage legislation, turned monuments into an easy target for any grouping trying to get its message across. A spate of incidents of vandalism against statues ensued. The political motivations are too complex to explain in 15 minutes, but it involved anger at economic inequality in the country, rivalry between the ruling ANC and an upcoming political party, the EFF, or the Economic Freedom Fighters, as well as campaigns playing on racial animosity in South Africa to benefit President Zuma and his allies involved in a state capturing exercise. Soon, the Rhodes Must Fall movement morphed into the Statues Must Fall movement with different players. The most graphic incident was the necklacing of a statue in a town called Uitenhage. Necklacing is a method used by Black communities to punish people who were suspected of collaborating with the apartheid regime in the struggle years before 1994. On 2 April 2015, 3 people set an Anglo-Boer war monument alight in this manner, as you can see there. The most serious damage to a monument occurred on 6 April 2015 when a memorial in Port Elizabeth erected in memory of animals that died during the Anglo-Boer War was completely dismantled. Many other monuments across the country were targeted with paint. This included statues of Boer leaders like Paul Kruger, British role players like Queen Victoria, apartheid-era leaders like former premiers, the iconic Mahatma Gandhi, the South African-born Portuguese poet Fernando Pessoa, and even First Peoples heroine Sarah Baartman. The defenders of these actions labeled all of the above as colonialists, white supremacists, proponents of apartheid, and therefore as offensive and not deserving of being represented in public spaces. In the town where I was born, Krugersdorp, monuments honoring Kruger and Strydom were covered in red paint, and obscenities as well as Boko Haram was painted on the paving and the plinths. With the situation clearly spiraling out of control, the Minister of Arts and Culture, Nathi Mthethwa, organized a public consultation event on 17 April 2015, where all stakeholders could voice their opinions about the future of statues and monuments in South Africa. At this event, the Rhodes Must Fall students were hailed as heroes by the organizers. At the end of the program, resolutions were presented to those present, including that a nationwide survey should be made of colonial and apartheid personalities, which are represented by place names, statues, and monuments, in order to determine which ones of them offend and therefore may not enjoy public representation. Arising from this summit, a task team was appointed by the Minister to make recommendations on the implementation of the resolutions and the transformation of heritage. This included a variety of representatives from diverse communities, including myself as representative of Afrikaners. Next, this task team attended public consultations in all 9 provinces of South Africa to hear communities' opinions about the memorialization of the country's very controversial past. In some communities, the need for economic development was so great that people showed little interest in the future of monuments. Elsewhere, the rallies created a platform for factionalism between political rivals, rather than focusing on the topic at hand. Common ground among communities was not forthcoming. By the end of 2015, the fight against tuition fees at universities and demands for the resignation of President Zuma had become so fierce that monuments received less attention and the vandalism abated to a great degree. The task team kept on wrestling with ways of working with our divisive past. Several times a final report was tabled for the approval of the team, then it was criticized, it was referred back. And in 2019, it was finally launched, but still without the unanimous approval of all team members. The government's Russian-inspired view that controversial monuments should be housed in a separate, specifically designated theme park, as they call it, is propagated in the report. It states that the purpose of monuments is to represent the values of the rulers of the day, and that no public space can be used for the representation of anything with which the current government does not agree. It also adds that monuments should rather celebrate universal themes, for example, like motherhood, than to commemorate specific people or specific events. The launch of the report happened almost unnoticed, but however, at the beginning of June 2020, protests against statues flared up briefly, probably also inspired by international events. The Paul Kruger monument in Pretoria was once again spray painted. The words "Killer, Killer" were painted on the sandstone pedestal, and an attempt was also made to paint BLM, Black Lives Matter, next to it. About 20 activists also demanded the removal of Rhodes' statue in Kimberley. Reference was made to the death of George Floyd in the United States, but also to Collins Khoza, a South African who during the COVID-19 lockdown in South Africa was assaulted and eventually died after the assault. He was assaulted by South African army members, and in this incident, race ironically did not play a role. In South Africa's Heritage Month, September of last year, Parliament approved the recommendations contained in the task team's report. It was announced that an audit of statues and monuments in the country would be undertaken, and the establishment of a theme park to which the offensive memorials would be relocated would then proceed. Even within the ranks of the ruling party, people objected to the plans, and with our economy in a free fall, further announcements re the process have not been made yet. And so we wait with bated breath once again for the next chapter in the saga. What can be learned from the above? I don't know really, it seems to be very little, but in the first place, monuments are easy targets when voicing anger and useful tools for getting attention to a variety of political, economic, and other causes, also because they inspire very strong emotions, both on the side of the supporters and of the opponents of what they represent. Secondly, South African heritage legislation calls for public consultation processes. but these usually are symbolic exercises only in South Africa, with authorities proceeding with their original plans, irrespective of the outcome of such consultations. Thirdly, because of the emotion involved, destructive outcomes of protests include self-censure, generalized condemnation of certain periods in history, and the forging of a worldview without either objectivity or room for nuances. In the fourth place, often people who use monuments in this manner in South Africa have a very limited knowledge and understanding of history. And in the fifth place, above all, there is no solution that will satisfy all stakeholders. Or should I be positive and say none yet? To reach a state of mutual recognition of the contribution of all communities in a country, heritage symbols have to be handled with care, as their retention, relocation, or their destruction may serve to deepen existing rifts between communities, and in a worst case scenario may escalate from the vandalizing of monuments to violence against humans. Room has to exist in public spaces for the commemoration of the rule of all South Africans. Discussions about the future of our past are crucial if we want to foster a culture of mutual respect and understanding among not only South Africans, but people in general. I think we owe this to ourselves, to the generations preceding us, and ultimately to those who will come after us. And I think today's event is an important contribution in this regard. I therefore once again thank you for the opportunity to participate and to the organizers for making this possible today. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Alana, for this very interesting paper on this very sensitive topic. I see on the chat we have 3 questions. I will already give them to you. The first one was, why has been Pessoa targeted? Second one, were also new post-apartheid monuments sometimes targeted? And does this movement goes beyond monument? Does it mean that it also included changing names, street names, cities and roads? So these are the first 3 questions, and I think we don't have the time to have more discussion than that. So if you can answer to this, it's really grateful.
Initially, the whole movement, but also people and causes and organizations who latched onto it was supposed to be an anti-colonial or anti-colonialist movement. So I think that made Pessoa quite a good target. He was born in our city, Durban, and that's why the statue was there. But the fact that later on even Mahatma Gandhi and Sarah Baartman were targeted, who were definitely not colonialists, or even European settlers, shows that people just started using monuments as a target to get attention. So sometimes also it wasn't clear for what they wanted attention, because very often the people who actually did the vandalism was never identified. The police later on became involved, so people were careful if they vandalized the monument not to get caught. Also, post-1994 statues were targeted. Vandals target all monuments for the metal theft, like you could have seen in that First World War memorial, but also white supremacists targeted some of the modern monuments, usually with paint thrown at them. So there have been incidents in a town called Louis-Trichardt and also in Pretoria where new statues were erected. The third question, could you just remind me, please, Chantal?
The third question was, is this movement also going on street names, renaming cities, roads? And a very last question that just connected with what you say, the fact that the idea is to replace the topics of the monument with very general themes. How do you see this? Do you see this as an opportunity to change the role of memory in public life, or is this just an argument to have topics that are less sensitive and that can be approved by all the communities?
The process is still going on beyond monuments. So 2 weeks ago, some of our major cities had name changes. Port Elizabeth, where that Horse Memorial was dismantled, has now been renamed Gqeberha. So the process is going on, but not with as much bitterness and violence as in 2015. 2015 was really the worst year, where people were really very close to going over into violence against each other. And then
the fact that new topics such as motherhood are introduced in monuments.
I think, unfortunately, it's an effort to create a national symbolism and a national cohesion. But as our national holidays show, it doesn't work very well. After 1994, up to 1996, we had to decide on new national commemoration days. And some days which had a very strong anti-apartheid sentiment, for example, the 21st of March, which was a day on which in the 1960s there was a massacre by police of protesters at Sharpeville, was renamed Human Rights Day. And around the 21st of March, there is always an effort to have some human rights put into the spotlight. But very few people actually celebrate these holidays. So I think the same will probably be the case with monuments, where people will not really get caught up in the sentiment of something that is created that synthetically. Or maybe after a generation or two, they may get caught up in it, but at the moment, people still focus on the celebrations or the events or the people that they were used to. And something more generalized doesn't really catch on with South Africans.
Thank you very much, Alana.